Just a few little introductions. My name's Charlotte Fisher. I'm the road running manager at England Athletics. My areas of work sort of around Masters programme, road running, international teams, England Championship events, a lot of club work around supporting leaders and coaches and runners within the club setup as well. And I do some work with Gavin as well around our gun to tape and supporting club run race providers. Obviously got Gavin Lightwood on the call today, Run Britain manager, and also really pleased to have Ashley Charlwood here, who's the health and safety consultant at UK Athletics. So the way the session is going to go today is we'll do around about 20 to 30 minutes of presentation from primarily from Gavin and Ashley, updating you on where we're at with things and just going through a bit of a health and safety side of things. And then the rest of the session really is open to you guys to put in some questions. I should also say we've got Spencer Duval on the call. Spencer's be sort of moderating the questions. So with 170 of you, I'm sure there'll be a lot of questions, but he'll try and filter those through. So we've got kind of common questions that come through, and we'll do our very best to answer as many of those as we can in the time that we've got. So this is I think it's my fourth webinar, and it's the first one I've done since licensed races have now returned, albeit in a limited form. So hopefully you're going to find this session useful. And as ever, if things crop up afterwards that you think about that didn't appear in your head at the time, please email if you've got any additional thoughts or questions or so on. So just for a quick recap of where we are, from the 1st of August, we reintroduced licensed races, and there's a slide further on in which I'll talk about that in further detail. And how we've got to that position is that we worked with Sport England and the Department of Culture, Media and Sport in producing guidelines to allow outdoor events to go ahead that fell under the DCMS framework for such events. In terms of how it came about from a running perspective, the group involved myself, Ash, who's on this call, Tom Craggs, who a lot of you will know from previous webinars, and members of the mass participation sports organisers, which includes London Marathon, Great Run Company, and Human Race, who are the organisers of the Manchester Marathon and various triathlon events. So we worked closely together in producing those guidelines and published them mid-July, and gave people a bit of time to digest them and so on, and then reintroduced licensed races from the 1st of August. There's a number of elements that most of you will have digested these guidelines by now, and I'll pick up on some of them later on in one of my further slides. But a key element of the requirements for every race at the moment held under COVID-19 restrictions is that an event appoints a COVID-19 officer. That could be a specific role, or it could be someone like the race organizer or the course manager taking on that role in addition to their other role. But that role is key. And another key element is the fact that an event must have a COVID-19 risk assessment. For all our licensed events ever, we've always insisted that you have a risk assessment and a medical risk assessment anyway, but we're now asking for a COVID-specific risk assessment. What I found since we introduced these guidelines is there's been a number of people coming to me asking about risk assessments relating to COVID-19, and I back them on to Ashley because he's obviously the expert in this field. So I'm going to hand over to him in a second to talk through that process, but also point out there are examples of risk assessments on the COVID-19 page tab on the Run Britain website. So we've got 2 or 3 different worked examples in there for you to have a look at. But now over to Ashley, who can go into much more detail, obviously, about COVID-19 and risk assessments. Ashley.
Thanks, Gavin. I guess whenever we start talking about health and safety, everybody switches off normally, because it's the bit that nobody really enjoys about organising things they're passionate about. So just to kind of reassure you, I guess, where I'm coming from in my kind of role as health and safety advisor with UK Athletics. My background's been in all sorts of sports professionally, so I've been involved in sailing and the World Air Games and all kinds of high risk activities, and I've also run the National Whitewater Centre up in Wales. So I've been on I guess both sides of the fence with risk assessments. I've produced them and now kind of advise on them. And the reason I became a health and safety consultant was around the fact that I got really fed up of health and safety consultants saying that you can't do things. So I actually went out and got my qualifications so that I could support people doing positive things. So where we're coming from with risk assessment isn't about putting the handbrake on. It's about making sure that things are as safe as they need to be to go ahead. So you, when you're producing a risk assessment, it's can be incredibly tempting to just take a risk assessment that you've Googled somewhere and you just change a few words in it and then you submit the risk assessment. And I think the really important bit to start with on risk assessments is that it is your proof that you've evaluated the significant risks for your event. And it's where, unfortunately, in our kind of history in the UK overall, no win, no fee solicitors can request this document. It's a discoverable document in the case that there's an incident, and if things don't tie up, you'll go from having a very, very quick response of showing a risk assessment to having to start defending how you've evaluated the risk. So in legal terms, we're wanting a competent person to evaluate the significant risk. So I'm just going to pick up on a few of those words there. So a competent person is somebody who has sort of 6 key attributes. So they have to have the skills, the knowledge, the training and the experience, and then the right attitude and a recognition of their own responsibilities. So what's happening within that is you're just making sure that the person that's putting on the event knows about the event itself. So there's no point in me as a health and safety consultant writing your risk assessment, because you're the person that understands the nuances of where the start and finish is and all the public spaces that are around it. So you as the race organizer are the right person to create that risk assessment. And when you evaluate the risks, you're looking to show that you've identified the significant hazards that are around your event, and then what you're doing to control them. So the risk assessment template that's up on the screen at the moment is the one that's on the UK Athletics website. And what it's doing is it's showing very clearly the process that it's health and safety executive talk about, what are the hazards, who might be harmed, what you're doing. So do you need to do more or do you need to do less to control it, and what the risks are at that point? Then what do you do next in terms of controlling the hazard, and what the resultant risk? So what happens to the risk after you've done those things? So that's the process by which you're looking at a significant hazard. So again, in normal conditions, we're not expecting to see making a cup of tea on a risk assessment, although there is a hazard of being burnt and all that stuff there, but it's not a significant enough risk to put in a risk assessment unless there's other circumstances. But in normal processes, that would be fine. So we're not looking for war and peace in our risk assessment. They should be simple documents for everybody to understand. Now, when we move on to COVID, in many ways, it's quite helpful that we've got significant risks are published by government. So we're probably all fairly familiar now with the fact that we've got aerosol transmission. So that's the being breathed out. We've got formite transmission, which is the bit where it's on surfaces and then is being picked up by touch. And then we've got community transmission. So we've got those three different bits of the significant risks that COVID is presenting to a race. And it's then how those risks are managed by yourself. So in the guidance that Run Britain's put out, there's a lot of ideas and guidance about how you might be able to control those significant risks specific to your event. So disinfecting, removing contact points, not giving out medals, not having water stations in less than 10k becomes a more significant risk if somebody's dehydrated. So in longer races, we start seeing the kind of approach of reintroducing those things. But it's always about balancing the risk between transferring the virus and also managing the other kind of hazards that are around the area. So in an office space with COVID, we want to see social distancing as far as is possible. If the office is on fire, the risk of being burnt is much higher. So actually you can sort of tolerate the breaking of social distances to get people out of offices. So again, in a race environment, we're trying to reduce the risk to an acceptably low level through the aerosol transmission, the touch transmission, and then within the community. But there has to be a pragmatic look at how that might sit on the other side. So when we start talking about emergency plans, moving people away from big risks like fire risks, or in the emergency action plan side of your risk assessment, we need to be thinking about how those risks sit specifically to your event. So one of the premises of UK Athletics' insurance is that where an event is going to be insured and licensed, the race organizer needs to have undertaken suitable and sufficient risk assessment. Now, UK Athletics can't look through every line and of every risk assessment and draw a absolute opinion of what's happening on that place. We can see what might be reasonable. We might be able to look at things and decide what is a generic risk that's been taken from somewhere else and something that's a specific risk to your event, but we can't form a complete opinion on every significant risk assessment. It's just not possible. So the duty is on you as event organisers to undertake that risk assessment and look at the significant risks and then evaluate those significant risks and reduce it to a resultant risk that is acceptable. In the big piece, that feels like quite a lot of responsibility for a single person, I would suggest. So there would be people within your race organisation that it would be fair to share the risk assessment with, and as a group decide how you're reducing it to an acceptable level. And that really is good practice as well, is rather than a single person analysing everything, it's for more people to look at things and for more people to say, yes, I think you've thought about this, or have we thought about this? Have we thought about how first aid will happen? Have we got the right way of managing spectators, if indeed you can have them at all at your event, which is obviously a moving feast at the moment. So from a kind of overview of the risk assessment point of view, what you're really looking for as a risk as an event organizer is to show that you've evaluated those transmission risks of coronavirus in those three key areas. So if on that template that we've got over on the screen at the moment, if that far left-hand column says what are the hazards, and you've got aerosol transmission, formite transmission, so touch surface transmission, and the community element of how those things are being transmitted, if those are the three headings on that line, and then everything else in those following columns is specific to those types of transmission, then you have evaluated those risks, and there'll be lots of things within those. So you might have 5 or 6 lines for each one of those, but that is what we're looking for in terms of a good evaluation of the significant risk from coronavirus. And I think, Gavin, from my perspective, that's probably what I want to cover at this point.